Hey guys, it's Tilly here from Cylanda. I'm going to talk today about what you need to know about NIST, SPRS, and CMMC because these are all pretty important stuff. And we're going to be giving this presentation to the American Council of Engineering Companies of Hawaii. That is the Hawaii chapter. And let's get right down to it. So, just a little bit of a disclaimer before we get started. Now, there is no sales pitch here. I promise you. Anything I'll be offering for free is for free. Really, it is. We do it to help protect the community because, as you will see throughout this presentation, the community really needs it. And part of this framework, this cybersecurity framework that we're going to be talking about, is designed to help you be more resilient to cyber attacks and become more resilient to problems in your organization. So that's my disclaimer before we continue. Now, you're probably wondering why do this? And I'll tell you, it's because of these two little guys right here. Now, I originally started this business as a outlet to help protect people. And it's kind of in my nature. I'm a dad, and I really want to protect the community in the same way. And once you have kids, they really make you focus. And once I had my two, I became hyper focused on security. And I want them to be able to go out and work and have a living wage and be able to stay here to kind of fight that brain drain that every knowledge work industry suffers here in Hawaii. So, worked very hard to see if we can do this with cybersecurity. I do have a vision to grow this company internationally with Hawaii as a home base, to grow local jobs, and to give employment for those who are qualified and have the backbone to get into cybersecurity because it is tough, but I feel that there's great opportunity here, and it's been identified as a very important industry, not just by the Fed, but locally here at our university school systems. And so there's going to be a real push for cyber. We want to give them a place to go. So let's do that. Now, let's just talk a little bit about cybersecurity in the news. I'm not sure if you heard about this, but just over the weekend, Colonial Pipeline. Now, this is a very important critical infrastructure organization. They supply the east coast of the United States with over 50% of its oil. That accounts for crude and refined. The cyber attack over the weekend, it deployed a ransomware, and it is so far the largest energy infrastructure cyber attack on U.S. soil. Those that perpetrated the attack were Russian non-state actors, otherwise known as a criminal gang called DarkSide. I know that's a Star Wars reference for those of you who are Star Wars savvy, but what are you going to do? Okay, so as Russian non-state actors, they were able to operate, quote unquote, outside of the sanction of the Russian government. Now, we don't know. According to some sources, nobody can really operate without the blessing of the government there, but we don't know. They were able to gain access from victim data that was leaked on the dark web itself. So that means they were able to pick out credentials that were otherwise not theirs because someone else had gone to a website or had had their computer infected by something that was able to siphon those credentials, and criminals were able to then get in there. As a result of this unfortunate ransomware incident, where it essentially locks down all their computers and all the pipeline is shut down, even as we speak, prices of gas are expected to rise. We're going to expect widespread fuel shortages. There could be fuel hoarding. It's gonna mess up it's going to disrupt the delivery of packages and air transport. Now, air transportation and ground transportation typically have 3 to 5 days of fuel on reserve. Right now, we're in a holding pattern because we're about 3 days into the cyber attack, and there are predictions that it could become very very much of a problem in the next couple of days. So we're keeping an eye on that. So unfortunately, this Colonial Pipeline Enterprise, they are a private company. So there is a limited release of information. But I at least wanted to show you the FBI flash. Now, this is the raw material that comes from the FBI, and I'm going to be posting it onto our website through a private URL just for you, so that you can go in there and read this for yourself. This talks about, this is a TLP green. This is traffic light protocol green, which means it's for need to know only. But because you are in this industry, you do need to know. It tells you how to look for indicators of compromise within your network of ransomware. It does mention specifically dark side ransomware, but any ransomware this will apply to. I encourage you to give this to your IT department. It tells you how to kind of mitigate some of these responses, what you can do yourself to keep yourself protected. And they just released this on May 10th. This is on Monday, right after this cyber attack made its way to being public. Now, as of Saturday, as of Sunday, so the day before, there was an emergency declaration ordered by the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. This is for the many states there on the East Coast that are affected by this cyber attack, and there is a very strong chance that they know something we don't about how this is going to affect the transportation industry there, which is why Alabama, Arkansas, DC, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, they're all on high alert because of this cyber attack. And I'm also going to post this onto the private portal that I'm going to give you the URL for at the end of this presentation. But this is very serious stuff. And, unfortunately, the Justice Department just made an announcement last month. They said that last year, so 2020, was the worst year to date for ransomware attacks. And they're only becoming more frequent. On average, ransomware demands exceeded $100,000 last year, and in some cases were up to tens of millions of dollars. So over $350 million were reported. Now, mind you, reported, not paid. So they reported that that's what they gave cyber criminals as a result of ransomware. And compared to 2019, that means we're up over 300%. 300% compared to 2019. Ransomware, of course, is where a cyber criminal gets inside your network, encrypts everything and holds it for ransom and shuts everything down without your ability to get back up and running without paying that ransom. So you may think that perhaps this is a unique incident. However, I'd like to point out that just a couple of months ago, back on February 5th, Florida's Oldsmar water treatment plant hack, they accessed their network remotely, and they increased what would be called the sodium hydroxide levels. Now, to you and me, that means lye, and lye is not good. They changed that level in the water filtration systems computer system live at 1 o'clock in the morning from 100 parts per million to 11,100 parts per million. So a lot. Now, luckily, a worker happened to be watching the gauges at the time. They saw the gauges rise and they shut everything down right away. Now, this attack would have caused physical harm to the public, such as having the water turn acidic. It would have been dangerous, not drinkable, not potable, would have been a real problem. So the details of this attack and how to mitigate it, it's on a TLP white briefing by joint. It's from the CISA and FBI. I'm going to show that to you. Here we go. So I recommend that we take this very seriously, because this is not a problem that's far off in the future or an issue that doesn't necessarily affect your industry. As you will see later on in this presentation, it absolutely does. So let's talk a little bit about what we do now that you see the urgency of what we're up against. We're in the managed security sector, an MSSP. So we take care of the outsourced security compliance, a lot of the kind of like infrastructure management responsibilities that you might find that an IT department may not be entirely on top of. So we make the IT departments look good, and it falls under this kind of professional services umbrella of intangible goods, kind of knowledge work. And as I mentioned earlier, our mission is to grow local jobs. I believe that we can help companies around the globe stay protected, solve security challenges, and be more resilient to attacks. Been doing this for some time, since 2007, but we really are looking for clients that have cybersecurity compliance requirements. They're interested in streamlining, improving, becoming more resilient, stronger, streamlined with their operations. And in order to do that, we typically work either with the owner or with the IT departments so that we can all be a good team to support what your mission is. You may have seen me I've been on TV, pretty much every station, radio. I'm on social media quite a bit. We do a lot of fun videos, a lot of community education. So if you haven't heard of that, or if you haven't seen that, feel free to go to our website, subscribe to our blog. It's on our blog page. You can see some of the stuff that I've done over the past year. We've really pushed it a little bit more, a little bit fun to try to make it more entertaining for the community. We're just trying to get through to people that cyber is real, these threats are real, and what to do about it. So at the end of the day, we believe, and I think this is pretty obvious, that every one of us is connected to the most dangerous, insecure network on the planet. That's also called the internet. And so what we do protects businesses from theft, crime, and disaster. Now, what we usually see, and people that reach out to us, they say, well, we have pressure from an outside vendor, either from a third party, from a client, and that there's some sort of compliance requirement. And typically the IT department is not as familiar with the intricacies, and the business owners are not as familiar with the details of how to meet these compliance methods, and trying to figure it out on your own can be a real pickle. So this is a great reason why we exist as a resource to the community. We have some solutions ourselves, obviously not all the solutions, but we can point you in the right direction for most compliance kind of things that you may come across. Now, IT departments also sometimes will reach out to us. They do need some expertise and some help and some direction, some guidance. That's what we're there for. Sometimes it's for projects. Sometimes it's for office moves. It's a staff augmentation, not just compliance necessarily. And it usually rolls into this next one, which is streamlining and helping to manage and secure everything you got. Because at the end of the day, you're only as strong as the weakest device and procedure on your network. So if there's some poor hygiene there, if there's some atrophy and cybertosis at play, then this is something that we can help with. And unfortunately, we also do get called out to recover from incidents. We have to work with law enforcement, FBI, Homeland Security, to sometimes do data gathering, chain of custody analysis, data and digital forensics, and these kind of things are more specialized. Thankfully, they're something that doesn't happen every single day, at least not here in Hawaii, but they do around the globe. So we do unfortunately have to bring some companies and revive them back from the brink of extinction, from having to deal with these cyber criminals. 3 pillars of service. We'll kind of go through this very quickly. Obviously, we do cybersecurity. We do the compliance bit, so we help folks, meet these requirements. That includes specifically our specialties are CMMC, SOC 2, GDPR, ISO 27001, and as we're going to probably spend the most amount of time on, NIST SP 800-171. On the IT management staff side, we'll bring that security expertise to the organization. We do all that kind of busy grunt work that no one really wants to do, but it's critical and essential, and we make sure that you have a good disaster plan in place so that if the worst does happen, things are set up correctly to get back online fairly quickly. Probably a good place to start is to talk just a little bit about a recent project, so that demonstrates kind of the experience and things we've had to deal with in the front lines. This recent project was for a critical infrastructure chemical sector company. Now, some of the details I'm going to tell you have been changed so that you're not able to readily identify which company this was, but they were local. We didn't have to deal with the FBI, work with the FBI, Homeland Security, and it all began on a Friday afternoon, as most of these things often do. 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, we get a call on a Friday, and that call is from the IT department of this critical infrastructure company. IT department says, "We just had a visit from the FBI." FBI presented his gun and badge and documentation indicating that we had been compromised. In fact, at that moment, the cyber criminals had infiltrated their network and were selling access, as invisible access, to watch the computer screens of all the several hundred employees' computers, to watch them in real time, and they were selling that on the dark web. So not only were they watching everything, they had infiltrated everything, gained footholds inside the network, but they were selling that access to the highest bidder. And after the FBI agent went away, they said, "We knew who to call." And they called us. And so we spent the next few days doing analysis. Now, unfortunately, the way that this stuff works is that the threat actors, or APTs, Advanced Persistent Threat Actors, let's call them the bad guys. Bad guys have footholds inside the network, which means that once they've gotten in, they put up a nice little safe place for them to operate out of, and they add additional safe places around. So just because you find one doesn't necessarily mean that the next safe place isn't infected. Now, when you start going in there and poking around, maybe start removing some of those footholds, the bad guys realize it. And what do they deploy? You guessed it, ransomware. And that ransomware encrypted everything and took everything to a worse spot. Now, luckily, there was a good disaster plan in place. They didn't have CUI to deal with. It had some private information, but it was pretty clear that this kind of stuff was happening at the local level. It was happening to companies that were similar to yours, not just in their industry, but in the way that their network is architected, and that they were a target. Now, let's just be clear, the FBI and Homeland Security have issued several private sector notifications showing how construction and engineering industries are targets. I'll just show you two of these right here. This one is back from 2020, so this is last year. This was talking about how business email compromise schemes target construction contractors and their clients for financial gain. And of course, this will be on the private portal so you can see it for yourself. Second one comes from FBI. This one is TLP White, and it also indicates the same thing, that construction and here we go. Cyber actors leverage subscription-based commercial databases to conduct business email compromise fraud against construction companies. BEC is the primary attack vector for these sort of infections, and once they get inside, they can operate and do whatever they want, steal data, hold it for ransom, or just sit there and watch everything and wait for the opportune time to strike, which of course is typically on a Friday afternoon. Good news behind this story is that they were able to get back up and running, minimal damage. We were able to submit the raw drives to Homeland Security for forensics, and luckily, no real permanent damage was done. And it was because the IT department had done some due diligence to have a good backup plan in place. So they got lucky. They didn't have to pay the ransom. If you are interested, the highest ransom that the FBI has seen on island is about $800,000. We've seen them between $100,000 and $200,000, and it is unfortunate, but there are much lower values as well, anywhere from $3,000 to $5,000 to $10,000 to $15,000 for smaller organizations, and they do get paid and sometimes not reported to law enforcement. So we can only hope that a reputable, there's honor amongst thieves, hopefully, where they can get their data back if they do pay the ransom, although that is not always the case. And the FBI does advise against paying the ransom if you are presented with one. So let's just talk about, now that I've kind of given you a good introduction as to why this is so important, we're going to talk about CUI, what it is, and why it relates to you. NIST 800 SP 800-171. I'm going to show you a roadmap to compliance you can follow that'll cover you through most compliance challenges. We'll talk about CMMC, SPRS, and common requirements that we've seen across different compliance standards. At the end, I'll give you some free resources you can take with you and back to your IT departments. And then we'll wrap it up with a Q&A session at the very end, if we have time. So let's talk about CUI. CUI, Control Unclassified Information, is probably something you know already. It's for data or plans that you receive that is marked as confidential or private, and it could include law enforcement technical plans, intelligence, financial data, and this data is a highly valuable target for cyber criminals. In fact, CMMC was created to protect CUI. And if we look at this CMMC literature, we're going to jump over here to page 5. It specifically outlines, this is CMMC, right? This is the CMMC model actual 1.02. It outlines why this is important. It says here, the theft of intellectual property and sensitive information is bad. The Council of Economic Advisors estimates that $57 to $109 billion has gone out the window in 2016 alone. And of course, it's gotten worse. This long tirade you can read yourself, but essentially the Fed became very serious about protecting our nation's very important intellectual property, and they do want to enforce it through CMMC. And we'll get to how that all works here. But it does mention that there are over 300,000 companies that support the DoD, and the defense industrial base sector is a prime target by cyber criminals seeking to steal CUI. All right, so we'll close that up here. Now you're probably wondering, all the CUI, where does it all go? They come inside our network, they steal some data, maybe they hold it hostage. Where does it go? And I'll tell you where. It's the dark web. Now the dark web, it's an interesting slide. If you look at it, think of the internet like an iceberg. At the very top, you have your surface web. Things like Facebook, Google, whatever, CNN, news sites, public-facing sites. The deep web is a little bit more interesting. That's the private networks that probably has your credit card, financial information, medical history, that kind of thing. Universities. They exist on the deep web, private networks. And underneath all that is the dark web. And the dark web is not a nice place. This is where the buying and selling of bad things happen. In fact, there's kind of a spoof of it on the Wreck-It Ralph sequel, if you've seen that with your kids. But, don't take my word for it. How about we just look at Wikipedia? According to Wikipedia, dark web is the invisible, hidden part of the World Wide Web, commonly used for the buying and selling of recreational drugs, for totalitarian societies such as ISIS to communicate with the outside world, operating organized crime syndicates, human trafficking, corporate espionage, identity theft, illegal trade, and media exchange for pedophiles and terrorists. That's where your data ends up for sale. Now, this all began in 2015 with NIST 800-171. NIST is National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the DoD picked up the 800-171 standard in order to protect the CUI that was being provided to prime and subcontractors. Now, as of 2017, they began the enforcement process. And what do you think happened? Well, after December, there were the contractors were, primes were expected to provide their contracting officer with some very elaborate documentation, specifically a POAM, which is a POAM, Plan of Action Milestones. That's what's showing which deficiencies they are unable to meet and when they plan to have them remediated, and as well as an SSP. Now, this is the System Security Plan. This is kind of a breakdown of what you're going to do to actually keep things operational and on what points you're specifically, it lays out kind of like your plan. So which exact deficiencies you're addressing and how you're going to get back up and going. Well, in order to accomplish this, and this is something that you can follow with every compliance standard, I'm going to show you a quick roadmap. So you start with a gap assessment. This is identifying the gaps, right? The difference between what they want and where you are. After that, you do a written plan. And that's going to be your POAM, your SSP, in the case of 800-171 and CMMC. And in these instances, you will also be submitting these documents either to your CO or your SPRS or your CMMC internal file that you're going to be submitting for audit. And then at the very last step, after you've done the gaps, you've created the plan, you made your submission of paperwork, you actually have to do the work, right? And that's implementing controls and also regular reviews, right? You can't just expect to get it all done in one shot, do you? You have to do it through multiple passes. Remember, security is not a destination, it's a state of being. And as a state of being, you have to take showers more than once, you have to brush your teeth more than once, you have to exercise more than once. Same thing with cybersecurity. And so what that means is at the very last step, you have to start all over. And that means occasionally you'll have to have reviews, go through your gap assessment, identify the gaps, make sure you actually patch them, update your POAM and SSP, resubmit, and do the work. So I'd like to show you a little bit about what a gap assessment actually looks like. This is one in particular that we look at. So this is the NIST 800-171 gap assessment. And we'll look at, of the 110 controls. Controls are kind of requirements. It's the best way to put it. They're called practices in CMMC. They had to mix it up to make it make themselves feel important. But at the end of the day, it's all the same stuff. And there is each of these controls. We'll go through each of them. We explain them. We figure it out. What does this language actually mean? And then we'll assign a pass-fail based on each of these controls. And we'll go through them one at a time. Everything from limiting unsuccessful logon attempts, right? Do we lock out computers? And also, do you provide security notices, both on the system and to staff? So that's more of an operational requirement. So you'll see that it's not 100% IT, it's not 100% operational, it's a mix of both. So these are the gap assessments you want to start doing inside of your organization in order to meet this compliance requirement. So you're probably wondering, with this NIST 800-171 procedure and self-certification, what could go wrong? I'll tell you. Contractors, they kept pushing it further and further out. They said, well, we'll get to this in 3 months. Well, we'll get to this in 6 months. And as the Fed discovered this was occurring, they got upset. So about a year later, January 21st, 2019, the Undersecretary of Defense said, "We are not happy with this, and we are going to do something about it." And that something is CMMC. They began fighting in 2019, and because there was no official way to certify, and they were just simply depending on the goodwill and faith of their contractors, they developed CMMC. And CMMC is, in case you're wondering what the acronym means, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. Because, of course, can a contracting officer read and interpret stacks of paperwork like a POAM and a SSP? Of course not. So, third-party auditors come in that are CMMCs trained and certified. They come in to audit and certify your company and submit that audit to the CMMC Accreditation Board. If they approve it, you're then issued a compliance certificate. And that compliance certificate is what you will turn in with your bid. And the bid will dictate how high of a certificate you need to go to. Good news is that there is more than one level. In fact, there are 5, and they operate much like Lego bricks. So on level 1, we have 17 practices. Remember, I called them controls with 801.71. CMMC, they call them practices. Nothing wrong with that. And these 17 practices are the very foundational level. So you want to start with level 1 CMMC. And with those 17 practices, you're going to start to see that spread out in different sectors. So for example, if you would like to become 8A certified with the SBA, you now are required to pass CMMC level 1. The target for most companies is level 3. Now, if you do the math, remember I mentioned how NIST 800-171 has 110 controls. Level 2, if you add on those 55 additional practices to the 17, you get 72 practices. Level 3 is already at 130 practices. So it's 20 practices more than NIST 800-171. As of a few weeks ago, I believe there were no level 4 and level 5 certified assessors. That is soon to change. And you can look out for not just the assessors coming in, but also something called registered practitioners. RPs are the ones that will actually help you to become certified if you can't do it yourself, so that when the assessor does show up, everything is in order and you hopefully pass the first time. Now, if you're probably wondering, this sounds all great, but we are talking about the federal government here. How good are they about actually rolling these things out in a timely fashion? Now, they claim that revision 1.0 of CMMC will be released on January 20th, 2020. And sure enough, it was released. However, it was released roughly a few minutes before midnight on January 31st, 2020. And they made a couple of revisions, and by June, they did have version 1.02, and it hasn't changed since. So that's good. This was the original CMMC timeline. They said in late 2019, they're going to release that draft, not in January of 2020. And then by June, it would start to be show up in RFPs. And by September, everyone will need to have this requirement in effect. Now, obviously, the pandemic came in, so it was a likely scapegoat, but I think we could all agree that early on, this seemed like a very optimistic timeline. So, not in effect. Now, this is the new timeline. Now, CMMC certification, it will be required on all contracts by September 30th, 2025. That's the hard stop deadline. And although it's valid for 3 years, they're kind of doing a phased rollout approach. So their targets are to have 15 organizations in 2021 become CMMC certified, 2022, 75 more, 2023, more and more and more. And so the idea is that they roll it out slowly over time. I cannot tell you where your place in line is, but if you are involved, even as a sub on a DoD contract, this will apply to you eventually. Now, not to be outdone by confusion, a new requirement popped up in November of 2020. They said, we have not implemented this CMMC standard in time, but we do want to at least make sure that you, as a primer sub, are actually doing your due diligence with NIST 800-171. Enter SPRS, Supplier Performance Risk System. And this started appearing on contracts late November. And what it asks for is a score. In order to either be paid or be awarded the contract, they want a score. And what does that score look like? They take a score based on your gap, right, of your 800-171 controls. They want to see that you have a POAM and an SSP that you can submit to SPRS. Now, they're going to also want a score. Now, this is a self-assessed score, so they do have low confidence in it, but it's very easy to get a very interesting, or should I say, very scary score. And I'll show you where this comes from. This scoring methodology is also available in your portal, which I'll give you the link for at the very end of this. We're going to jump on down this little document here, so that way you can see where these scores come from. Very first one is 3.1.1. You start off with a score of 110. For everything that you fail to meet, for each one of these controls you fail to meet, you subtract the number of points in this column. As you may imagine, it can become very easy to obtain a negative score. If you obtain a negative score, you look bad. You don't want to look bad. Get a positive score, and you will have a better chance of being awarded the contract versus someone else who has a negative score. We also have on our blog a quick guide that can walk you through this. If you feel like having a long read, it goes through the entire SPRS process, why they're doing it, and how it's kind of this bridge between NIST 800-171 and CMMC. So, as you can see on the screen, I know what you're thinking. This is all very scary and a lot to take in. But the good news is you should be doing these things anyway. This is all best business practices. Are you eating your vegetables? Are you doing diet and exercise in an appropriate fashion? Or are you eating chocolate cake at 2 a.m.? There is a difference. So best business practices are what they are asking for and asking for you to enforce. They're not particularly unreasonable requests based on the kind of work that's being done. Now, I told you a few stories in the beginning, right? You don't want to end up like them, do you? So these practices are meant to help you. They're meant to prevent disaster from occurring at your business. I did want to talk kind of a little bit about what some of these common requirements that we start to see over and over again, so that you get an idea as to what I'm talking about when I say best business practices. First one I want to talk about is documentation. Now, some folks have documentation, but it's perhaps a few years out of date. Some have it, and it's in a Word document in a folder, which if it were encrypted, you would not have access to, which is something we've seen. So, when is the last time that your paper documentation was laid out? Such as staff. This is one of the primary controls on here. Technology, right? Who has access to what, why, and what staff members are supposed to be doing that work? Do you have procedures for when there's a staff change, staff augmentation, any sort of technology use, right? So when do the backups run? How do you get them back? What is the disaster recovery plan? Are you going to communicate with clients? Who do you need to communicate with? Who are your primary important vendors? Right? These are all important questions that don't take a lot of effort to really put down on paper, not as much as you think. Some folks get away with just short paragraphs and a few checklists, and it's all covered. The key is to have something in paper that's current, or at least reviewed annually. Another thing that we see a lot of is there's a need for employee cybersecurity awareness training. The idea is to have a structured approach. Sometimes we talk with IT departments and they say, yes, we try to do a cybersecurity workshop twice per year during the lunch hour. Well, I can tell you now, if you are eating as we speak, I have lost half of your attention right away. And much like exercise and having a good diet, you do need to do it more often than twice per year. And having a good structured approach is the way to do that. This is an example of the dashboard from the Employee Security Awareness Training Program we use, and it shows those red bars going down over time as employees are trained and they don't fall for the same tricks that such as phishing and doing some bad internet behavior. Those kind of things go down over time if the staff is trained correctly. So having that structured approach shows evidence of progress. However, we have found that it is difficult to get employees to buy into this. So it really does have to come from upper management. But I'll tell you this, if you have NIST or CMMC requirements, this is going to be mandatory for you. Let's talk about something else we see. Web content filtering. This is something you might think is fairly basic, but a lot of times the attack vectors come through email phishing. And if someone were to click on that email message, well, they've just infected the computer, the network, who knows what. Sometimes advertiser networks on websites are infiltrated, and that leads to malware distribution onto your network. Websites get compromised. In fact, we received an angry call a few months ago from someone who wanted to order food for their staff from a local restaurant, and our web content filter was blocking them. This was, of course, Friday night. And sure enough, we went to the website, and that restaurant, the restaurant website, this is a local restaurant, had been infected with malware distribution. So, of course, we were blocking it. They had to phone in the order, and later on, the website was fixed. Point is, a lot of this stuff is accidental. Employers often want to know what their employees are doing while they're on the job, especially if they're working from home. And so having a good web content filtering solution in place is a fantastic tool for this. In other situations, sometimes certain departments would like to have access to things like social media, so sales, marketing, etc., but not necessarily for the operations side or the engineering section. So content restrictions based on these kind of roles help to keep the staff efficient. And of course, we talked about accidental visits. We don't want to go there. But I think the key thing that you need to take away from this is that website content filtering is one of the simplest, less exciting, but most effective tools to get the whole protection process started, and it's going to be a compliance requirement. I want to talk briefly about antivirus versus EDR. There is a big difference. Antivirus is reactive. That means that after something has made its way onto your computer, it jumps in there, runs it by a definition library, and says, yes, this is a problem. I'm going to stop it. Unfortunately, the world has evolved. In fact, Symantec has given up on many of their antivirus solutions because it's no longer effective. EDR is endpoint detection and response, right? And EDR, that's proactive. And so it's looking at what's going on with this software program. We recently did a segment about how video game developers' computers are being infected. And those video games, as they are brought to market, end up infecting the people who buy their video games. It infects their computers. That is a problem. That's a supply chain attack. And when that occurs, at the very end, there's no way to know if there's a malicious program occurring without having an EDR solution in place. It looks for scripts, any sort of unusual access that it tries to grant itself. If the software program tries to go out and reach out to the network and probe the network for vulnerabilities, it'll catch that also. So having an EDR solution meets compliance requirements because it satisfies the need for live monitoring of network, of user activity. And user activity is defined by software activity. So you want to make sure that a good EDR solution is in place there, because at the end of the day, this is an arms race. And they know, when I say they, remember I mentioned the bad guys earlier. The bad guys know that you are a target and how these tools work, and they try to work around them. So let's talk some more about some more technology safeguards. A good one is UTM gateway level filtering. So many of those virus the EDR types activity and the antivirus type activity and the web content filtering activity is good to have on the actual gateway device, because that gateway device is protecting your network from the most insecure network on the planet. Remember, the internet. UTM means Unified Threat Management. You're going to hear that term quite a bit. The word firewall is very 1980s. We don't use those words as much anymore. Or if they do, they say it's a UTM firewall to kind of get that to differentiate itself, because it is using AI, and the AI is watching threats inside and outside the network and trying to stop them if they try to do something malicious. Internally, on the inbound, there's usually something called an IDS, intrusion detection system. You're going to see this in a lot of UTMs. And they'll do things like packet inspection, so that's web traffic filtering, little virus filtering, threat blocking, all these kind of bad things. And of course, there's traffic shaping to ensure that even though it's doing all these advanced activities, you don't notice. You can continue to work inside your office, no issues. Typically, they also come with VPNs. There is something called FIPS, validated VPN encryption. If you are subject to NIST 800-171 or CMMC, you are going to want to make sure that your UTM does use FIPS validated encryption for the VPN traffic. Otherwise, it may be intercepted. Now, one of the last ones here, and I promise I'm not going to go too much further on all these common things we see, but we do see SIM. So SIM is Security Information and Event Management. And what that means is that it's accepting all the log files from all the devices on the network and interpreting them. You're probably wondering, who is interpreting them? That's the SOC team, Security Operations Center. Now, the activity of all the devices in your network, right? They get picked up from your workstations, servers, UTMs, and then they're analyzed for anything that could be unusual. And this is done mostly in real time. And then any sort of suspicious activity, anything else, it gets interpreted through AI, machine learning, and live cybersecurity professionals. And that, at the end, results in a lack of footholds in your network, right? You don't want these cyber criminals to get in there, and you can now do that when you have a live team of professionals doing this. Now remember, I showed you earlier on to think about your risk and how important it is. You are a target. I showed you how we have these cross-sector business email compromise schemes targeting construction and engineering firms. This is coming from the FBI. You'll be able to see that there for yourself. They've issued multiple statements indicating that construction engineering firms are being targeted by cyber criminals. You should do something about this. So I recommend you really think about these things that I've shown you, see how you can implement them in your own company. I want to make sure you have all these resources at your fingertips. Many of these things I did show you, I want to make sure that you feel comfortable. You can dig deeper into them. Your IT departments can dig deeper into them. Of course, if they have questions, they can reach out to us. To access these resources, go to Silanda.com. On the resources tab, click on ACECH. Or you can just go to Silanda.com/ACECH. Password to access that site is resilient. You can see a copy of this presentation, links to all these resources that I provided for you, the PDFs that indicate the green white resources. And I also want to make sure to give you access to these free resources we provide the community. We can do a free phishing risk assessment that'll show you which of your staff are falling for things. If they're not falling for phishing, well, that's great. But guess what? They're being phished every day anyway. Why not find out if they're falling for it? So you can also do a dark web company search, see how much of your information is on the dark web. You'll see a resource for that there. We also have network documentation template for IT departments, so that way they can start documenting their network if the network diagram is a little bit out of date. And we can also even offer a 30-day free monitoring of your Office 365 account for your company. What that's going to show us is any sort of unusual logins, mail forwarding rules, any sort of weaknesses in your security posture, i.e., two-factor authentication is not enabled, simple passwords are in play, and it's going to give you a real good comprehensive report. These are all things we want to do to help you become stronger. And of course, we have our total security product, which includes all the stuff we've been talking about. It includes the EDR, includes the web content filtering, etc. We want to give that out as also a free trial for organizations because it's that valuable. It's the best we've been able to find. In this presentation as well, there's some additional links, and you can download that from the PowerPoint. And at this time, I would like to open it up for questions and answers. And thank you for your attention and for giving me the opportunity to help you stay safe.